Hi everyone, today we'll be talking about the Sony NX5. This is the video camera that you have available to yourself to check out when you're attending MSU. Back when we're in person, you'll be able to rent out this camera from ComArts. To start looking at the Sony NX5, the first and most important thing you need to do is learn how to put a battery into the camera. Here in my hands I have a Sony NP-F 970 battery. You can see at one end we have these small pinholes. To put the battery into the camera, you'll want to start with going to the back of the camera. You'll see there's a nice slot here, and in that slot you make it so those nice pinholes are pointing down and towards the front of the camera. So we have the curved edge out in front here, and then we can simply just slide the battery in and push it all the way up to make sure that it's sitting flush against the back of the camera. And then when you push the battery down, you'll hear a nice click, and your battery will now be in the camera. It'll be locked in place, and you will be unable to pull it out. To be able to take the battery out of the camera, you'll see there's a battery release button right here. To take it out, you press on the battery release, push up on the battery, you'll hear another nice click to take it out, and the battery should be able to slide out. So again, make sure those pinholes right here are pointing down. You place the battery into the camera, push up, it'll go all the way back to the back of the camera, and then push down, and the battery will be locked into place. From here, you're now able to turn on the camera. To turn on the camera, we'll again be looking towards the rear here. On the right-hand side of the camera, you'll see that there's this nice little knob. If you press this knob up, it'll be able to be turned on. The camera is now turned on, and you're now able to use the camera. It's now turned on and ready to work. Once the camera is turned on, you'll be able to want to see what you're shooting. Now there's two different ways to see what you're shooting with these cameras. You have the viewfinder, and you also have the screen. To be able to use your screen, you simply take the screen, open it up, and then now you should be able to see the content that is being shown on the screen. Typically when these cameras open up, because they didn't have a battery in them previously, they'll have this set of clock functions that you'll need to replace. My tip to you all when you're working with these cameras, if you're ever in a menu or somewhere that you don't know how to get out of, you'll see there's the menu button directly on the top of the camera here, and if you simply just press the menu button multiple times, you'll be able to get back to where you're seeing an image on the camera. Unfortunately right now, you're actually unable to see anything on the camera. That's due to the fact that our lens cover is closed. When we come over to the left-hand side of the camera, you'll see on the camera here there is a little switch on the lens cover here. If you press up on that, the lens will now be open. Again, I'll show you that shot from the lens. This is with the lens cover open. If we press down on that lever, it is now closed. So here is our open lens cover. We are now able to get an image on our lens. A quick overview of the camera. You have two main parts of the camera. You have the body and the lens. The body is the back half of the camera where you're able to control everything. It's considered like the brain of the camera where everything works. Now that we have an image on our lens, we'll be able to go over the few basic functions of how a camera works. A camera has three primary controls. And in the front, you have the lens. This is basically the eyes of the camera, where everything is going to be viewed from the camera, and then it is controlled and captured by the body. You have your exposure, which brightens and darkens the image. Exposure has multiple different terms for it, so you could be adjusting your exposure. People could call it adjusting your iris. People could call it adjusting your aperture or your f-stop. The f-stop is the technical term. You've probably heard things like f2.2, f1.8, f5.6. That is what your f-stop number is, but adjusting that number is what is adjusting your exposure, your iris, your aperture, any of those things. You'll see here, if you look directly into the lens, you'll be able to see as I'm adjusting it, the lens actually is slightly changing, and you can see on the frame here, as we're looking at a light, you can see that it's getting brighter and darker as I'm adjusting the exposure. To adjust the exposure, you simply adjust to the ring that's closest to the camera body. The next ring on the camera is the zoom ring. This is the ring in the middle of the three rings that are on your camera. As you adjust this, the image simply zooms in and out. This is the most common thing. You've probably pinched to zoom on your phones before, anything like that. So as I open the iris back up so we can get some image here, you'll be able to see me zooming in and out on the frame here. When controlling the zoom on your camera, there's one other place along with that second ring that you can adjust your zoom at. You'll see it right here on the side. You can zoom your camera in or out using this button right here. It'll allow your lens to zoom in and out. Very helpful for when you're in handheld mode and you're not using the camera on a tripod. So the third place you can zoom in and out at is right up here on the top. Again, it's got the W for wide, T for tight. The third and arguably most important to go along with exposure making sure that we get our image, is our focus. To make sure that you're able to focus, you want to use this ring here. Many cameras you'll be working with have what's called autofocus. That way your image is always in focus on its own. That's how your phones work. You don't have to focus manually. However, one thing that separates older technology from newer technology right now is their ability to autofocus. These are good cameras still. They're definitely still usable as we go through this course, but the one downfall with them is that they have pretty bad autofocus. I always like to make sure that all of our students are comfortable focusing manually. As you get up to higher and more advanced cameras, they'll typically have what's called manual lenses, so you have to control all of these settings yourself. So that's why we like to start you right now, even though certain cameras that you work with may have autofocus. A few notes: make sure that your camera is set to manual focus here on the side. You'll see there's the switch to go from auto to manual. You'll also see over here we have what's called an ND filter. When you're shooting indoors, you always want to make sure that's set to 0. You only ever want to turn that on if you need to make your image much darker. So it can set to 1, 2, or 3. As we're going through our ND filter, it's basically like putting a pair of sunglasses on your camera. So you'll look here, as I'm shooting this light that's in front of me, as I adjust the ND filter, if I turn it up, you can see how much darker the light itself is getting. This is at ND3 and down to wide open with no ND filter. It's like putting a pair or 3 of sunglasses on your lens, and it makes the image darker without affecting the color or image quality. A few other notes: right next to where you put your battery in at, you'll see there's this door that can open up. That's where you can put your SD cards at to be able to actually record your videos. Once you have your SD card in the camera, you'll want to be able to do the most important thing with a camera, and that is record. To hit record, there's 2 different spots you can record from. Spot number 1 is right here up on top. If you press that, you'll be ready to record and your camera will be rolling. You'll see the numbers moving on the top. It'll have a nice red record and a red light will come up on the front of your camera. There's a second place to hit record at, and that is on the back of the camera here next to your power button. If you press that, again, that's another record button for you, and you'll be able to continue to record your film. Both of those can start and stop your recording. When you're finally ready to sit down and shoot something with this camera, there's a few things you want to do. Number 1 is frame your shot. When you're framing your shot, you're going to be using a combination of moving the camera around, adjusting its pan and tilt on your tripod, along with focusing your shot. So to focus our lens, we want to start with zooming all the way in on our subject. So you can see I'm pointed at some drawers here to the side of me. As I zoom in though, it quickly gets very, very blurry and you can't tell what's on the screen. So we're going to start with focusing our camera, and then as we focus, we start to be able to see those lines, and now we have a nice crisp, clear picture. We can really see the wood in the shot here. To go one step further, you'll see right here we have a button. This says expanded focus. If you press the expanded focus button, it's now zoomed in even more and you're able to focus even more clearly. So I was off ever so slightly, so now I can adjust my focus and I have a nice crisp focus that allows me to shoot my subject at a high quality visual. Press the expanded focus button. You want to make sure that you exit out of it. If I were to just zoom back out and hit record right now, this is not the image that I would end up recording on my camera. I would actually record a wider shot. The expanded focus is what's called a digital zoom. When we're zooming in and out on the camera, as you see here, you'll be able to actually see that the lens is moving in and out. Digital zoom happens when it is cropping in on the picture digitally after it is being captured by the camera. Because these cameras record at 1920 by 1080p and you want your final product to be at least 1080p or higher of a resolution, if you crop in digitally, you'll end up losing pixels and losing picture quality. That's the quickest way to have an amateurish looking video, and we want to make sure that you are all camera professionals, so we want to make sure that all of your videos are at 1920 by 1080. So we want to make sure that we exit that expanded focus here, and then you can now see it's a much wider shot and you're now able to work with a different image on your camera. The one other thing that you need when you're recording with your camera to make sure you have a nice quality image is to properly set your color temperature. When you're shooting a film, you want to make sure that everything looks natural and it fits with the lighting that you're using. Right now, I'm shooting with some tungsten light, which has a color temperature of 3200K. As I'm shooting with that tungsten light, that makes things look very orange relative to if I was outdoors and I was in the sun, or if I were looking at something that's nice and white like an LED light, that's considered to have a color temperature of 5600K. As you're recording with these cameras, you want to make sure that your white balance is set properly to the correct color temperature to make sure that you're able to see what is happening in your image and the colors are represented accurately. To start, we're going to hit the menu button, and you'll see it opens up right to camera settings. You can see at the very bottom here, it says white balance preset along with white balance outdoor level. We're going to go ahead and start with selecting the camera settings and going down to that white balance preset option. Right now we have outdoor, indoor, or manual white balance temperature. We're going to select manual white balance temperature because we can control the temperature ourselves that way and enter the exact number that we want it to be set to. Because we're filmmakers and we know what different color temperatures are of things, remember that's 3200K for tungsten lights and 5600K for daylight. So we're going to head on down to our white balance temperature setting, select that. Right now it's set to 6500K, and then as I lower this number, we're going to go all the way down to 3200K. And you'll see that my previously orange tinted background is turning into the gray and white that it naturally is. So when I go ahead and select that, it'll be set to 3200K. I've now white balanced my camera. If you don't see the camera changing your white balance visually while you're lowering that number, you're going to come over to the side of the camera. As you look at the side of the camera here, you'll see there's this switch that has A, B, or preset on it, right below the words white balance. That's abbreviated, of course. To adjust the light, to make sure that it's being adjusted by the number that you set in the program, you just take this switch and set it all the way down to preset, and then you've now set your white balance properly. To be able to white balance using the camera's internal sensors to make sure you get the color temperature as accurate as possible, we're going to go ahead and zoom in on this white piece of paper we have in our shot. So we're going to zoom in all the way, so that way the white is taking up the entire frame. And then we're going to go ahead and check the side of the camera to make sure instead of preset, we have the camera set to either A or B. Once we have it so our shot is lined up with the white, we can go ahead and press the white balance button here on the screen to make sure that we see either an A or a B blinking at the bottom of our frame here. And then you can go ahead and press this A, B preset button. When you press that, it'll blink, pop up with a number. This time around, we got 2900K, and then it's now set to white. We need to make sure that this switch over here is set to either A or B though. If it's not set to A or B, you won't be able to measure your white balance. If it's set to preset, it will not measure the white balance correctly. So again, now you can see that we have our white balance symbol right there, and it is working properly. And a close-up of this while you can actually see the screen here, we're going to go ahead and make sure our switch is set to either A or B. We're going to set it to A because that's an off color. See how that white doesn't look white on our screen. And then we're going to go ahead and hit the measurement button. It blinks quickly, comes up with a number, 2900K, and then we now have our shot set. Once you're done recording on your camera and you want to watch something back, you can always go ahead and check the visual index button right here. When you press that, that'll open up the playback window. You'll have your list of clips shown right here on the screen, and you'll be able to go ahead and watch through all of your footage. When working with your tripod, you have two separate parts. You have your sticks and you have the head of the tripod. Sticks can usually come in either 2 or 3 stages. That's the amount of adjustability with your height. A 2-stage tripod means you have the bottom and the top of your sticks, and then the 3-stage tripod means that you have 3 stages or 3 stages of adjustment for your sticks. You also have the tripod head. The tripods you'll be using here have what's called a smooth head. That means that there's actual liquid in the head, and it allows the head to turn smoothly while you're adjusting it. You can actually adjust the amount of friction in the tripod head while you're turning it. When you're working with the tripod, the first thing you always want to do is make sure to loosen the tripod handle before you open up the legs. If you open up the legs while the tripod handle is locked in place and down, you can actually bend and damage the legs, causing the tripod to be unusable. The tripods that we use come in a nice heavy-duty carrying case. Whenever you take the tripod out of the case, you always want to make sure to set the case on its side so that way it cannot be knocked over. When there isn't a tripod in the case becomes very top-heavy, allowing it to be knocked over easily, and it can knock over something much more expensive, such as a nice light or your camera itself. Using the tripod, you'll see there's a handle on either the right or left-hand side. You can swap it depending on if you are right or left-handed. I typically keep the tripod handle on the right-hand side. Your tripod, you'll see at the bottom of the head there is a knob that you can loosen or tighten. Once you loosen that, you can look to the back of the tripod and you'll see that there's a level that you can adjust. To level the tripod and make sure that you have good horizon lines, you can go ahead and loosen the knob that is on the bottom of the tripod. Once the knob is loosened, you can use the level on the back of your tripod to adjust the tripod head to make sure that it is level, and then you are able to use your camera. When attaching the camera to the tripod, you'll see there is a plate on the camera. When you have the arm swung out to the proper position pointing to the back of the camera, you'll want to slide your camera onto the tripod head from the back to the front, the back being the side that the tripod arm is attached to, and the front being the opposite side. As you slide the camera forwards from back to front, you'll be able to put the camera and lock it into place. Once the camera is set onto the tripod head, then you can tighten the knob on the left-hand side and your camera will be locked into position. It will no longer be able to slide off of the tripod. Be aware of when you're using the tripod and the camera together is to make sure to not lift the camera and tripod head together. That means that you don't want to use the handle that's directly on top of the camera when you're picking up the tripod and the camera together. If you want to move both the tripod and camera, always make sure to pick it up via the tripod itself. That's because there is one small screw that is attaching the plate to the camera, and if that screw strips out of its holding place, then you can no longer attach the camera to the tripod, which is one of the most important things that you need to be able to do when you're using a camera.